The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
Welcome to another Leon Charney Report. We have a really eclectic and exciting show tonight. Welcome to another Leon Charney Report, and a very special report. We have with us Moshe Arens, who really needs no introduction, but I will introduce him in case you want to refresh your recollection. He was the defense minister of Israel, the ambassador of Israel to Washington. He's an MIT graduate, foreign minister. When the Scuds were taking place, he was the defense minister sitting in Washington, D.C., could be at the White House. We'll talk about it in 1 minute. And I was in his home in Savion filming the Leon Charney Report, and I think he was being scudded at that time. In any case, it's great to bring him to the show, and we really need to hear from him what's going on in Israel, because it looks a little haphazard to the viewers, at least in the United States. Moshe, welcome to the show.
It's nice to be your guest again, not for the first time.
You remember that incident when, during the Gulf War, you're in Savion, you live in Savion.
Right,
Savion
right.
was being scudded as you were sitting in the White House, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, to be exact, it was being scudded in the sense that one scud fell in Savion and fell not far from my house. I won't forget it, my wife won't forget it.
And we have it on TV.
Yeah, on TV. And I did happen to be on a 24-hour visit to Washington, and I was sitting in Baker's office when they passed me a note saying that a scud had landed in Savion, and I had to excuse myself, go out and talk to my wife, and find out that she was okay.
Pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
Clear this up. I interviewed your Prime Minister, Shamir, many times, Yitzhak Shamir. And that was one of the biggest political moves, I think, in his career. When there was the war, the Gulf War, and the United States asked Israel not to reply to Iraq at that point.
Not to get involved.
Right.
Yes.
Eagleberger flew to meet you guys.
Eagleberger and Wolfowitz.
And they asked you not to do it. Was that a very tough decision for Shamir?
Well, I don't know that he had any
Choice?
But no, I wasn't going to say that. I don't know that there was any particular point where he made the decision not to do it. He dragged his feet. He was influenced by the calls from George Bush Sr., who was the president at the time. I think that he thought that he was building up a very good relationship with him that would stand him in good stead in the months and the years to come. And so I think his feeling was that it would not be good to cross him to do something that seemed to be so important to the President of the United States. But the war dragged on, and we were making our preparations for an operation. And then all of a sudden, as you remember, President Bush declared the ceasefire, and the show was over. And I suppose that maybe if Shamir had not dragged his feet and said to me, okay, go ahead, that we might have just gotten that last punch in before the war was over.
Well, you were defense minister.
Right.
Was it your call or his call?
Well, it's a government call. In other words, the way the procedure is in a case like that is I have to bring first to the Prime Minister, then to the government the operational plan, and ask for their approval. Now, if the Prime Minister does not approve it, he's not likely to bring it to the government, and that would be the end of it.
What did you feel at that time? Was that correct decision?
I think the correct decision would have been for Israel to make a move.
Really?
Absolutely, no question about it. Look, we have never been hit without responding. That's not our style. You know, that may be Christian doctrine. You turn the other cheek. That's not Jewish doctrine. And we were being hit by Scuds, not only the Scud near my home, we got about 39 Scuds on Israel during the 5 weeks of the war. And not only was it the principle of responding, as a principle that we've always stood by, and I hope continue to stand by, but also we were concerned that they were continuing to Scud us, that possibly we might get some rockets with chemical warheads,
right.
and that we had to do everything in our power to protect the civilian population, to put a stop to it.
And the United States was against it because it would infuriate the other Arab countries, the coalition? Is that
Well, but Bush had very masterfully put together a grand coalition that included the Arab countries, included Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and he did not want an impression to be created that this was a war in which Israel was involved or in which Israel was even starring. He wanted Israel to stay on the sidelines. He thought, although it's clear in retrospect that he was wrong on that the coalition might break up. We didn't want the coalition to break up either. And that could have aborted the whole operation against Saddam Hussein at the time. But we know today the coalition wouldn't have broken up, and by the time we would have carried out the operation, it was already after 3 weeks of bombing of Iraq. The operation was going very well. Nobody was going to pull out of that coalition, so it would have been okay. There wasn't really any risk there. And I flew to Washington the time that the Scud landed near my backyard, or almost my backyard, to tell the president that we were going to carry out an operation. He didn't like to hear it.
When the war commenced, though, I remember distinctly Eagleberger flying over to Israel to meet you guys.
Oh, yes. Well, first of all, Eagleberger came in before the war.
Right.
To tell us that the United States was going to launch an operation. And their concern at the time was that Israel would take some preemptive action.
That's the
even before the United States
right.
Began the operation. And that might screw everything up.
Right.
So he wanted a commitment from us that we would not take preemptive action. And he got that commitment from us. As a matter of fact, he got the commitment because in return he said, look, we know you're concerned about the Scuds, about being hit by Scuds. We will undertake during the first 24 hours, at most the first 48 hours, to neutralize the Scud threat. If we're not successful in doing it, we will stand aside and let you do what you think you have to do.
They thought Patriot missiles would help. They sent Patriot missiles.
They sent Patriot missiles. They didn't help.
They didn't work at all.
They didn't work. I think at first they thought that the U.S. Air Force, I mean, they had a lot of air power out there, that they would bombard the areas of western Iraq where the Scuds were being launched from, and that they would be able to identify the launchers and knock out the launchers. Well, in the 5 weeks of bombardment, they didn't kill a single launcher, and the Scuds kept coming. So when 48 hours were up and the Scuds kept coming, I said to Cheney, who was then Secretary of Defense, you said, if you don't do it in the first 48 hours, now it's our turn. Well, he said, I've got to go back to the president. And then the president called Shamir. And he said, please don't do it. It could screw up the whole operation. And so we went from one day to the next. In the meantime, we were preparing for this action. A very good general was going to be in charge of the operation, Nehemiah Tamari. He was killed later on in a helicopter accident. And I remember like this day that I sat around with the Army people when they reviewed the operation with me. And before I gave the okay, I looked at Nehemiah and I said, how do you feel about this? After all, it was an operation about 1,000 kilometers from Israel. Not simple, you know, an airborne operation. And he said, I feel good about it. We're going to do it. I said, okay.
Fascinating history. George Bush gave Shamir a hard time after that. He froze the $10 billion. I remember
the loan guarantees.
The loan guarantees.
Well, you see, it just goes to show you, I mean, how relationships between countries can develop. Eagleberger then came for the second time. You know, as I told you, he came the first time to prevent a preemptive launch, preemptive attack by us. He came the second time when he thought that now we were going to do something. He told us, please don't do it. He came with Wolfowitz. And one of the terms that he used, he said to Shamir and he said to me, listen, you've accommodated the President of the United States. You now have a lot of money in the bank in Washington. Now, I told Shamir, this
Baloney.
money is going to be devalued very quickly. And sure, no sooner that the Gulf operation was over and Shamir asked for the loan guarantees, the President said, you're not getting loan guarantees unless you dismantle settlement, and unless you commit yourself to no further settlements in the West Bank. And so there was no money left in the bank.
I remember that time distinctly. And then Yitzhak Rabin became prime minister. I was in Kennebunkport when he went and met with Bush. Baker had said some nasty words at that time about Israel, which I can't repeat. But
That was before.
And they were pretty tough. Although when I talked to Shamir, he had a great affinity for George Shultz. He always he loved George Shultz.
That was mutual, by the way. That was mutual. And I saw George Shultz just a few months ago. We were old friends. And I visited him in his office in San Francisco. And he recalled that he sat with Shamir, and he was trying to get him to agree to some diplomatic move. And he thought it wasn't going to be easy. So I said to Shamir, so what do you need in return? And he says, Shamir said to me, I don't need anything in return. I trust you, Mr. Schultz.
The Madrid conference, were you in the government at that time too?
Yes, I was defense minister.
Were you for it or against it?
I was for it.
I was out there with Shamir, and I think it was a big move on Shamir's part to go. No, wasn't it? It wasn't
Yeah,
easy
it was a good thing. I mean, it wasn't earth-shaking and didn't really change things radically in the Middle East. But it was the first time in a long time that we had direct face-to-face contact with Syrian representatives, Jordanian representatives, so it was a good move all in all.
Made your friend, who you really made, Bibi Netanyahu, a media star too.
Well, don't forget, he was a media star when he was ambassador at the United Nations.
Most people don't know this, but Moshe Arens really picked Bibi Netanyahu out of, I don't know where he found him, but he really, in a sense, gave him his first start. It was at the embassy in Washington?
At the embassy in Washington,
when you were
yes.
ambassador?
Right.
Did you know that he had star qualities in him then?
Not to the extent that became apparent later on, but I saw that he was a good operator, spoke perfect English, made contacts, got things moving, and I said, this is a good man to put into the embassy, and that was a good move.
What did he do at the embassy, by the way?
He was the number 2 man.
Do you know his father too?
Sure, know him well.
He's a great scholar, his father?
Great scholar. I think he's 97 years old, but you can interview him. He's in great shape, physically and mentally.
We will. That's a good idea.
Okay.
He's written some great books, historical books.
He's written great historical books, and I saw him just the other day, and he said to me, have you read my latest book? I said, well, what is your latest book? He says, my latest book is The 5 Fathers of Zionism. I said, well, I haven't read it. I have to go out and...
Who are they?
He said to me, so you know who the 5 Fathers of Zionism were?
Birnbaum.
Who?
Birnbaum was the first Zionist.
Well, he's not one of the 5
but
by...
he was. Very few people know
Okay,
that.
well, not by...
He gave the name Zionism, by the way.
Well, not by Professor Netanyahu's accounting. So anyway, he put me to the test, you know. I felt
right.
like a schoolboy. This
Okay.
professor of history is asking me, so who are the 5 Fathers of Zionism? Well, I said, Theodor Herzl, right? That's an easy one.
Right.
Jabotinsky, that's an easy one, right?
Weitzman.
No. Max Nordau. Most people have probably even have heard of him, but...
His street, they know. Nordau
okay.
Street.
So I got 3 out of 5, and they said, okay, who else? Who else?
Jabotinsky.
No, we have said it. Herzl, Jabotinsky, Max Nordau.
Right.
Well, now I see I'm getting a failing grade or barely passing.
Right.
He says to me, Pensker. Ah, Pensker. Yeah, Pensker wrote Auto Emancipation.
Right.
You ever read that book?
Yes.
Okay, so that's number 4. Number 5, I got stumped completely. I couldn't think of who number 5 would be. He said to me, Israel Zangwill.
Don't know.
Okay.
What did he do? Did you know about him?
Well, I know about him, yes. He was an early follower of Herzl's. He later became what was called a territorialist, in that he said it didn't have to be Palestine. Any place on the earth where we can get some territory for the Jewish people, that's where we should set up the Jewish state.
Wow. All right, we're going to cut for a break. We'll come right back.
Well, Jews are coming back and claiming their property through the World Jewish Congress. They are coming back. There is a whole list of countries that have been approached so that they restitute property, pay back money, give back art treasures that have been stolen by Goering in the tens of thousands, if not in the hundreds of thousands. Yes, Jews are coming back to ask for the property. In Norway, well, there were 700 Jews in Norway. Norway was the first one to give it back. Now Austria, that you mentioned, is facing demands to give back works of art that are hanging in its museums. And you have seen perhaps the movie The Lady in Gold about the Klimt picture. Yes, but I see a problem here, if you are asking. Jews are coming back, and there are two problems. One is the difference between higher echelons of countries who recognize the need and the justice in the demand to give back what was stolen, and the lower echelons or the public opinion, especially in Eastern Europe, where most of European Jewry resided before the Holocaust, and they say, we were first taken by the Nazis, then came the communists, settled themselves on our neck for at least 50 years, nationalized every penny we had, everything we had. Now come the Jews to claim back. We don't have it anymore. The original owners that took it, not owners, the original ones who took it from the Jews are not there anymore. And this gives way to additional anti-Semitic feelings, because what do they say today? They say, such a long time after the Holocaust, there is a state of Israel. It's not doing bad. It has many problems, but it's definitely not doing too bad. Most of the Jews do not live anymore, do not reside in Muslim countries or in the Eastern Bloc. Most of them, outside Israel, are in the uppermost countries, in well-to-do countries, enjoying culture, health service, Now they want their property back. Look at us. How did we come out of the communist regime? That was 25 years ago. Now it's a full generation, because we're speaking of the 1989, when the Eastern Bloc collapsed. But it takes them a long time to pull themselves together. And here come the Jews to ask for the money. So it doesn't add too much credit or sympathy to us, though it's a just demand to give back what was stolen. But this is what we are saying. It's not us who stole it. And if we did steal it, the Russians took it from us. And now we are destitute. So what do you want? I'm not sure I can connect between Sweden during the war, which supposedly was neutral. One among the neutral countries is Sweden, Spain, Portugal, Switzerland, Turkey. Sweden had during that time a lot of contacts with the Nazi regime because of financial and economic interests, no doubt. And I think that Raoul Wallenberg, whose 100th birthday we have marked some 2 years ago, was not kidnapped by the Soviets because he helped Jews. They couldn't care less if he helped or did not help Jews. This wasn't at all at the top of their priorities. He was kidnapped because he was a descendant to one of the major influential families in Sweden for generations, a wealthy family that had contacts with the Germans as well. And I think this is why they kidnapped him and not the Jewish affair. After the war, I must say to Sweden's credit that Sweden took in not only the 7,000 Jews of Denmark, it took in tens of thousands of refugees from Poland, from the Latvian countries, Baltic countries, from Finland, from Norway, and took care of them, and took good care of them. You know that the Swedes the food was rationed in order to have food for the refugees. And they helped Jews after the war. The Count Bernadotte organized the passage of refugees and the taking care of them in the white ambulances, in the Red Cross ambulances to Sweden. He did not deserve to be killed. And Sweden did its share in taking care of refugees in a most generous way. After the war, the sense of democracy and human rights in Sweden became stronger than before. It became a welfare state with a lot of care for the individual, his needs and his rights. And this is the yardstick with which Sweden is judging Israel, because they see in us a democracy. When we say, please, why are you obsessed, and they are obsessed, with the Palestinian question? Look at what's being done in Syria. More than 300,000 being killed. Millions are refugees. Look at Yemen, look at Iraq, there is no more Iraq. Look at Afghanistan, look at Libya, look at the Sinai. Well, these are problems, huge problems, much more than the Israel-Palestinian problem. They say yes, but all these countries are not democratic. These are all autocratic, fascist or whatever countries. We demand from you a democracy. We demand what we demand from ourselves. We demand human rights. We demand equality. We demand open and free press. We demand whatever we have. We see you as equals in this regard. And this is where it is difficult to let them understand that there is no threat at the existence of Sweden, while there are threats being voiced once and again against our existence in the area, okay, in the region. And this is where we have to defend ourselves. And when you defend yourself, you cannot be 100% righteous of the nations. And this is what they definitely refuse to understand. A foreign minister of Sweden, Wallström, Miss Wallström, she has become a laughingstock in Sweden itself because of the arguments she gives. Because recently she said that Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, is a cute person, is a peace lover. She said it in parliament, is a peace lover. And members of the parliament came up and said, please, he didn't denounce even one of the shots and the daggers and the cars running over people. He refused to denounce them. This is a peace-loving, please, choose your words at least, cute. So there is something to it, the way she expresses herself and the obsession with the welfare of the Palestinians. Well, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, since they are a forgery and not a real document, there were no Elders of Zion who really came together to a meeting, as this legend claims, and they spoke, and the protocols were written while they were speaking. There wasn't anything like that. So if this is a forgery, it has no rights, it has no copyrights. And since it has no copyrights, everyone, just everyone, can write his protocols. So protocols are being written by capitalists who blame socialists, by socialists who blame capitalists, by right who that is blaming the left who is blaming everyone. The protocols are all over in dozens of languages because they give an irrational, as we have said, but very handy and very catchy explanation to what is happening in the world. Argentina, in a very bad shape economically and financially a few years ago, there is a booklet called Plan Andinia, which is a derivation of the protocols. What is it? Israel is sending youngsters who are just out of army to the south of Argentina, to the Tierra del Fuego, and there they will start taking over the place, the land. Then they will take all of Argentina and then all of South America and please. And you have such irrational mices in Japan. In Japan they had a date. When is the date? It should have been, it didn't come out. That Zionism is taking over Japan and then the rest of the world. It gives a catchy and easy explanation to what is going on in the world wrong. What is going wrong? The Jews are trying to take it over, they are behind everything. If you don't want to take responsibility, you blame the Jews. And this is why the protocols are still here. They are handy, they are catchy, that's it. Right now, we are, I think, in a turning point. You spoke about Europe, what's Europe like today? We are in a turning point because one of the reasons certainly was Israel, the attitude towards Israel as a Jewish state. Many do not like to see Jews having power or administering their own fate. This does not go hand in hand with what they were used to think about Jews. But today, there are waves of immigrants who are coming by the millions, and they keep coming as we're speaking. They are changing Europe. They will change it. Most of them are Muslims. Among them are terrorists. We've seen that in France. And if not among them, terrorists are coming back from Daesh, those who enlisted to Daesh, to ISIS, and are coming back to perform terror. And so anti-Semitism here will change also. Europe is moving rightwards because of the refugees and because the right is pointing out the problems of having the refugees. And the left, who says, no, these are human people, we have to help them, has a weaker argument against the argument that they are changing society and eating up their resources. What will happen to anti-Semitism? It might increase because those coming would join Muslims who are already in Europe and are working against Jews and against Israel. But it might also, perhaps, get lower and less attention because this is not a real problem. The Jews are not the real problem. The real problem are the immigrants and the terrorists. So we'll see.
Well, today I'm dividing my life between two main levels. One is the search for peace. I am trying to do whatever I can in the context of the Geneva Initiative from 2003 in order to suggest ideas, to have meetings with the Palestinians and to see what can be done even in such a bleak moment. We are also educating people to peace, speaking with Arabs, with Jews in Israel and in Palestine. I served in the public arena for 31 years. First as the spokesman for the Labour Party under Shimon Peres, who was then the head of the opposition. And then I was the cabinet secretary, I was the director general of the Foreign Ministry. In '88 I was elected to the Knesset and became the deputy finance minister. Then after the victory of the Labour Party in '92, I became the deputy foreign minister, and in that context I initiated the Oslo Agreement. And in '95 I was nominated as the Minister of Economy under Rabin, a few months before his assassination. Then when Peres was elected as his successor, I gave up on the ministry. I dissolved the ministry because I thought that there was no room for this ministry. And I became a minister without portfolio, but in real life it was his deputy, as he was prime minister for a few months until the elections in which he lost to Netanyahu. Once we solved the problem between us and the Palestinians through the two-state solution, this solution should be under the umbrella of a confederation. It is very logical because we are speaking about a very small area. Israel originally is about 20,000 square kilometers. The West Bank is about 6,000 square kilometers. This is the whole story that we are talking about, and Gaza is 360 square kilometers. It is nothing. Now, any border which will be drawn between us and the Palestinians in the permanent solution will be about 3 times longer than the green line of 49. So we are speaking about something very complicated. And so you are speaking about environment. You are speaking about agricultural diseases, about water, about infrastructure, about so many things which should be dealt with together, including planning and zoning, at least on the border between the countries. So a kind of a confederation is required in order to deal with these all issues. And there are other issues which refer to the permanent solution and are part of the Oslo Agreement, namely Jerusalem, security, settlements, refugees. All these issues can be dealt with easier in a context of a confederation, rather than in a context of clear-cut two-state solution in which we don't see each other anymore. We built a wall between us, and that's the story. Nevertheless, I did want to raise the idea of a confederation too early, because it was so much attractive to speak about the solution as a kind of divorce rather than the other way around, that to come out and to say, okay, we are now having two-state solution and we are going to live together in the same framework, I felt that it was premature. And then I did not raise it. But then, talking to Palestinians and talking to Israelis, I got to the conclusion that the confederation should not create a kind of a problem for those who want to find a solution, but the other way around. Since it might make it easier to get to the two-state solution, which I believe is the only solution, then maybe the right thing is not to keep it to the end, but to raise it already now. And so when I'm speaking about it and I'm writing about it, I'm referring to the options to deal with the outstanding issues on our agenda through the idea of a confederation. I think that it is a win-win solution. First of all, because we need the Palestinians and the Palestinians need us. Israel needs the Palestinians, first of all, because it is a very important manpower. It is even today, in the midst of the third intifada, with the stabbing and all the problems that we are having, 100,000 Palestinians come every day to work in Israel. If they don't work in Israel, we have to import foreign workers who need somewhere to sleep and somewhere to stay. And this is a burden, and we have many foreign workers, but it is much more difficult than just to have workers who are across the border, if it is a border, come in the morning and leave in the afternoon. And they speak Hebrew, many of them. and they know Israel. So it is convenient to employ them, and the employers want them very much to work with all the fears and the problems. Also, Palestine or the West Bank is a market for Israel. We are exporting about $4 billion annually to the West Bank. It is not a joke. Since it is done in shekels, not in dollars or in euros, you will not see it as part of the Israeli export because it is seen as if it is an internal market. But it is not an internal market. You are speaking about food, you are speaking about many other products that we are sending every day to the West Bank. So here you see part of the Israeli need for the Palestinians to be connected to Israel is a big advantage. It is one of the most important economies in the world. The gap is very, very big. And if they are closer to us, if they work in Israel, and they get relatively high salaries there, and if they can benefit from the different components of the Israeli economy, this is very important for them, economically speaking, but it is not only the economy. One of the main issues, in my view, is the issue of security. Now, we agreed with the Palestinians in the past, in the unfinished business of making peace with them, but this was one of the easiest things to agree on, that the Palestine will be a non-militarized state. They agreed to it because they said, I mean, if we are going to have our own army, it's going to be a huge expenditure in the budget. We are poor. If we now allocate all our poor resources to security, then we will not be able to deal with health, with education, and with the other things which are very important for us. So from the beginning, they used to say formally and informally, we are ready for a non-militarized state. They will not have planes and tanks and whatever. But there is something new in the region in the last years. And this is Al-Qaeda or Daesh or other extreme groups which are threatening first and foremost the Arab world itself. Now imagine that somehow there is a miracle. You have good enough leaders on both sides, and they are courageous enough to make peace between them. And everything is agreed, more or less according to the Clinton parameters or the Geneva Initiative, which is based on the Clinton parameters. What about the Palestinian security? The real enemy of Palestine is not going to be Israel. It's going to be the ISIS of this world. And if they are there, and there is a non-militarized state, this is the easiest game for any lunatics to go there and to do something. So they will need a kind of an army. And here Israel has its own interest to be there on the borders, and can be invited by them to be there against their future or present enemies. If it is a two-state solution, it is very difficult because you are speaking about a totally sovereign state. So why Israelis are going there? They don't want the Israelis to be there if it is a sovereign state. But if it is part of a confederation, which of course it is again a sovereign state, but it has a framework, another framework, it has an umbrella, then cooperation between security forces is reasonable. It exists now when we are actually the only army there and we are giving the orders. This will not be the situation when we have a peace solution. We will not get in the middle of the night to the Palestinian villages and cities in order to get somebody, as we don't do that today in Gaza. And you know, between you and me, it is not that everybody in Gaza is a righteous person, no problems there. Some of them are very problematic for us. But since there is a border and we left it unilaterally and that's it, we never get there. So once we have peace with the other side, of course we will not try and give orders to the Palestinians and get to their homes and whatever. So it will not be the current relationship between the Israeli army and the security forces of Palestine. But this is going to be one of the major issues in the context of the Confederation. The Confederation, in my view, is a solution without buts. It is so needed for both sides, and in my view also very obvious. Even in the partition resolution 181 of 1914 in the UN, yes, they're speaking about a kind of a confederation. Because since both sides were always against partition, until the Jewish side in the 30s and then in the 40s said, okay, maybe there is no better solution. And since we want so much to have a state, we prefer to have a small state on part of the land and not to wait for another generation until we are a majority. The Palestinians said, why should we have a partition? After all, this is our land. The Jews are coming from Europe. They are reminded that 2,000 years ago, their ancestors lived here, and they push us out. No way, we don't want a partition. And you can say that both sides were right in their own way. So the solution of a partition is for sure a fallback. The idea of a confederation is to have a partition, but also not to do it in a very bold way, but to say, no, generally speaking, the cooperation will be on a very high level, and you will decide about its height. I mean, if you are not happy, you should cooperate on less authorities. If you see that it works and there is a will on both sides, you can then cooperate on more and more areas, even, for example, on culture, which is not an obvious issue to cooperate on in a confederation. But if you wish, why not? And so on and so forth. So what am I saying? If security is a major issue, the issue of the future of the settlements is another very, very thorny problem. The idea of evacuating all the settlements which will find themselves to the east of the future border, for example, in the Geneva Initiative, we are speaking about 2.25% annexation by Israel, which will be totally compensated from Israel of today. So still there will be settlements, or there will be many settlements to the east of this new border. Evacuating all of them is the nightmare of any prime minister or candidate for prime ministership in Israel, because we are speaking about the big number, and the idea of the right wing in Israel was to put as many settlements and settlers in the West Bank so that the idea of a two-state solution will not be realistic. Here, what I'm saying is, rather than fighting all the settlers after signing an agreement, to tell them, in 5 years from now, we will not be there anymore. We will not protect you. You will not be under any Israeli law. You will have to decide whether you leave your apartments there and come back to the borders of Israel, which will be new borders, and get compensation like the people in Gaza and others. You want to get compensation? Be my guest. You want to stay there as if you live in the diaspora, in Lebanon, in other places. In Syria, there were Jews until quite recently. Fine, it's fine with us. You will be an Israeli citizen. You will vote for the Knesset. But you will be a Palestinian resident and you will obey the Palestinian laws.
Peace means taking into account the dignity of other people and the fact that there are other people who have certain rights.
Welcome to the Charney Resolution Center. Today we are hearing from Professor Yossi Ben-Artzi of Haifa University and Professor Amiram Goldblum of Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So I would like to welcome you to the center today, and firstly I would like to begin by asking you, could you both please tell me or tell us a bit about your organization, Peace Now?
Peace Now organization of nowadays is a bit different from its beginning. Actually the trigger for establishing the movement about 38 years ago was the initiative of President Sadat, the late President Sadat of Egypt, his peace initiative in late 77. And after a couple of months that young people in Israel, we experienced just recently at that time the Yom Kippur War, the 73 war, thought that it's about a time to achieve peace with our neighbors. So about 300 people in reserves, in the Israeli army in reserves, signed a letter. And in this letter, they demand from the government to respond positively to the peace initiative, peace with Egypt at the beginning, initiative toward the Palestinian case at that time, and anti-settlements in the West Bank, because already in 1978 we thought this is the main obstacle on the future peace between Israel and the Palestinians.
I'm trying to connect to what Yossi said, and I'm connecting in two levels. One is this continuation of the quest for peace, which continues until this very day, but it focuses mostly on the issues of territories and the settlements, because the peace in Egypt has been achieved. Subsequently, there was peace with Jordan. We also had attempts for peace with Syria, but they failed at the time. And the biggest trouble is the peace with the Palestinians, because it was already advanced to a stage where there was a signing of an accord in 1993, the famous Oslo Accord in Washington. I was there on the lawn of the White House when it was signed, together with many friends from the American Friends of Peace Now, which is another aspect that Yossi just mentioned. The strength that we gain from support from the outside, from people who support peace in Israel, who support the conflict resolution, is enormously important for us. And this is why we are very keen on connecting with the world, connecting with people in the world who care about peace in the Middle East and who care about pushing and putting pressure even to the Israeli government in order to advance towards peace.
In your lecture, you said that one of the most important topics was that the youth has the power.
Right.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah, I think that of course, the youth is the future. The future belongs to the youth. So they have to design their own future and to fight for the future. Of course, it's not a matter for generation. I mean, peace is important for any age and any generation, but the real power which will push humankind toward the future is the younger generation, and they have to think about their fate. They have to think about the way, in what country, in what state would they like to live. That was the question which confronted us 40 years ago. We said, actually, the main question is not political, it's very ideological issue. In what state we would like to live, in what state we would like to raise our children up. Like you don't think maybe now that you're going to have children in the coming 10 years, but you're going to have it. And once you look at your kid and you ask, hey, in what future he should live? What do I prepare for him? What kind of a situation will be here? It's not a political question. It's a very, very basic question of your life.
Thank you, and see you next week at Charney Resolution Center.